Hi there. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, a very well known phrase from the great Peter Drucker, but it's so true. Culture is so important to the success of teams and organizations. So, when I'm doing work with leaders and managers in organizations, we inevitably have a conversation around culture. And one of the exercises I like to do is I like to get the team to say, as if I'm a complete stranger, and if I was to come in here and if I was to ask you, how would you describe the culture of your team or your organization? What are the kind of words that you'd use? And it's always a very interesting exercise to see what people come up with. But as teams and as organizations, it's very important that there's clarity around what the culture is. What are the acceptable do's and don'ts that we're all going to sign up to? And not only is it important that we're very clear in terms of what the definition of our culture is, it's also very important that people are aware of what it is, what we expect of people who are part of our organizations, and those kind of behaviors that we want to see on a consistent basis. So it's very important that we invest in the time in terms of defining it and also revisiting it on a regular basis to ensure that it's really serving our needs. Because how we engage internally as an organization and then how we engage externally with the stakeholders as well, that ultimately is going to determine the success or not of our culture and how consistently we're living and honoring our values and our culture. So when we have clarity around our culture, it really gives us the rules of the road, these operating principles in terms of, what is in scope and what isn't in scope. So what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior. And when we have clarity around that and when we're consistent with the established culture, it cuts out a lot of nonsense. It just means that we have people who are working with a shared vision, a shared plan, and there's a consistency in terms of how we engage with people both internally and externally. Now, culture written down on paper as words in itself is good, but it's no good really unless we're living and breathing it. So how are we practically implementing, procedures and policies and activities that ensure that we're consistently delivering in line with our culture? And it's also very important that as leaders and as managers that we're checking in to see, how successful are we? So first and foremost, starting with, what is a definition of success around living in line with our culture and our values? But, what are the practical ways that we can measure that to ensure that we're constantly keeping that standard high and that we're embodying everything that we set out to do when we would have put together the values and the culture in the first place. So a simple thing is to have some sort of a scorecard. So, what are the practical things around implementation of that culture that'll ensure that we are achieving what it is that we set out to achieve? Because there's so many benefits to having a really good and a positive culture within our teams and our organizations. So it builds trust, it builds rapport, it reduces turnover in terms of us losing good people. It's better for teamwork. It gets people aligned around the vision and the goal and the mission of the organization and the teams. And ultimately, it leads to greater productivity and greater profitability and success for the organization. So periodically, really good practice to sit down with your team, with the organization, and revisit, what is our culture? How are we honoring it? How are we living it? And when you do that, there's so many benefits that come from that. So I hope that helps.